There comes a time in political life when being called out on the world stage isn't just a diplomatic nudge, it's a mirror to the soul of leadership. That moment for Donald Trump appears to be now. India, a sovereign giant and growing world power, has made its stance increasingly clear in recent months. Its foreign policy is no longer about playing the sidelines or keeping quiet on global controversies. And when India voices concern or frustration over a former US president's rhetoric or behavior, the world listens. When Trump made certain offhanded remarks, some disparaging, some misinformed about global leaders, international relations, and even South Asia's geopolitical complexities, India wasn't content to quietly dismiss it. For many Indian policymakers and diplomats, it wasn't just about the words, it was about what those words meant for the future of global unity, stability, and truth. Trump, once praised for his America First boldness by his domestic base, found himself increasingly isolated on the world stage, with India emerging as a voice of principled realism. This moment invites us to look deeper than the headlines. What does it mean for a former US president to be called out by a country like India? This is not mere diplomacy. This is about shared democratic values. This is about respecting nations for their sovereignty, their narratives, and their leadership. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, regardless of where one stands on his politics, embodies the will of 1 billion people. And when Trump, either through omission or intention, undermines that leadership, it ripples through the fabric of international respect. But here's the more profound question. What does this say about leadership in the 21st century? We are living in a time where leadership is no longer about ego, about personal triumphs, or even about party lines. It is about service. It is about holding space for global voices. And Trump, despite the fanfare, despite the rallies, has struggled to grasp that global leadership demands not only strength but humility. India's response was not merely diplomatic retaliation. It was a moral call to recalibrate. It was a reminder that the words of leaders, even those no longer in office, carry weight. And in the grand narrative of democracy and international partnership, respect must go both ways. For years, India has been carefully strengthening its position as not just a regional leader, but a global moral compass, balancing tradition and modernity, economy and ethics, nationalism and globalism. So when India's establishment pushes back on Trump, they are also defending a broader ideal, the sanctity of international discourse. They're saying, you may speak, but we too have a voice and we will use it. That's not confrontation, that's evolution. And it's a message every global leader must now internalize. The era of unchecked rhetoric is over. Accountability is no longer a domestic demand, it's a global expectation. In such turbulent waters, the role of Pakistan's military leadership, especially someone as central as General Asim Munir, becomes all the more intriguing, but more on that later. Back to Trump, this moment is not just about what India said, it's about what Trump didn't hear. In this increasingly interconnected world, silence in response to critique is not strength, it's denial. True leadership, after all, isn't about always being right. It's about being willing to listen, to learn, to evolve. And perhaps that's the real crisis. Not that Trump was called out, but that he still doesn't understand why. We are at a crossroads, friends, and I believe this moment invites not just Trump, but every leader to ask the deeper question, are you building bridges or burning them? Because in the end, history remembers the unifiers, not the glorified loudspeakers. While the headlines swirl around Donald Trump and India's bold rebuttal, another name quietly enters the conversation, General Asim Munir, Pakistan's Chief of Army Staff. At first glance, his connection to Trump's political rhetoric or India's stance might seem peripheral. But in South Asia, nothing is ever truly disconnected. The question many observers are asking is, did Asim Munir condole Donald Trump, or was his silence a calculated message in itself? To understand this, we must first explore the unique position that General Munir holds in Pakistan. Unlike traditional democracies where civilian leadership takes center stage, Pakistan's military has long played a central role in shaping not just domestic security policy, but also international alignments. General Munir isn't just a military figure, he's one of the country's most powerful voices. His actions, or lack thereof, reverberate far beyond Rawalpindi. Now let's imagine the moment Donald Trump, facing backlash and isolation following India's pushback, might have looked for symbolic allies to stand beside him. Allies who could add weight to his vision of the world, of leadership, of transactional diplomacy. Pakistan, given its historic friction with India, might have been an obvious choice, but here lies the beauty of strategic maturity. General Munir didn't step forward with empty gestures. He didn't issue a statement. He didn't express overt support, and that silence speaks volumes. In diplomacy, silence can be many things. It can be disagreement, avoidance, or even quiet condemnation. But in this case, it may also be strategic distancing. Munir understands better than most the fragile state of South Asia's geopolitical climate. With Pakistan reeling from internal instability, economic pressures, and border tensions, any alignment with Trump's chaotic narrative could have backfired globally and domestically. Standing beside Trump at this hour would not have projected strength, it would have signaled confusion. Moreover, Munir's Pakistan is striving to reshape its international image. The country wants to be seen as a responsible regional actor, one capable of fighting extremism, enabling trade, and fostering peace. That image doesn't align with condoning the populist, often inflammatory style of Donald Trump. So in that light, Munir's silence was not neglect, it was discipline. It was an intentional move to maintain neutrality and preserve Pakistan's waning diplomatic capital. But here's where it becomes even more profound. Did Munir's silence indirectly validate India's position? Perhaps not explicitly, but by choosing not to back Trump, by refusing to be pulled into a narrative of old grievances and cheap alliances, Pakistan signaled a subtle acknowledgement that the rules of international engagement are changing. No longer is it about the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's about credibility, stability, legitimacy. And here's the human side of it. I believe General Munir, like any leader conscious of his legacy, understands that history is watching. Aligning with Trump after such visible international rebuke would not just have been unwise, it would have been a mistake of character. The world is moving away from strongman politics, from bluster and bravado. The leaders of tomorrow will not be those who shout the loudest, but those who speak with wisdom, clarity, and purpose. So when the world asked, did Asim Munir condole Trump? I think the answer is not found in press releases, but in the principles of restraint. Sometimes the strongest message is the one left unsaid. In choosing silence, Munir chose not to legitimize chaos. And that, in my view, is a lesson every leader should reflect upon. This also points to a larger shift in global politics, where military and civilian leaders alike are beginning to see that power without responsibility is a hollow victory. In this era, it's not enough to claim influence. One must earn it through dignity, through respect, through global understanding. Now, whether this silence translates into a long-term realignment of Pakistan's foreign posture remains to be seen. But for now, in this moment of global reckoning, General Munir did not extend comfort to Trump. And in doing so, he chose principle over performance. There's a quiet power rising in the world today, not loud, not brash, but determined, intentional, and deeply rooted in history. That power is India. For decades, India walked the delicate line between non-alignment and global aspiration, caught between East and West, tradition and transformation. But today it's clear that India is stepping into a different role, not just as a regional force, but as a global moral authority. And the recent incident involving Donald Trump and India's dignified pushback only illustrates this evolution.
India's message wasn't just political, it was ethical. When Trump's comments crossed the boundary of respectful international engagement, India didn't respond with theatrics. Instead, it asserted itself with clarity and, more importantly, with values. This, I believe, is what makes India's new global presence so remarkable. In a world shaken by authoritarianism, misinformation, and populist agendas, India is trying, however imperfectly, to anchor its international stance in something deeper: dignity, sovereignty, and justice.
Now, let's be clear, India is not without its own internal challenges. From rising polarization to complex human rights questions, the country is navigating its own contradictions. But in foreign policy, particularly in how it engages with the West, it has matured into a voice that insists on mutual respect, not subordination. This shift is not accidental. It's the product of years of careful recalibration, moving away from being the recipient of Western diplomacy to being a creator of international consensus. Take, for example, India's increasing presence in global institutions, the G20, the BRICS alliance, the Quad. India is no longer just reacting to global currents, it is shaping them, and that assertiveness showed clearly in how it confronted Trump's recent rhetoric. India didn't just push back to defend its own image, it did so to remind the world that no nation, no matter how powerful, can belittle another with impunity. That's the kind of leadership we need in the 21st century, not domination, but balance, not arrogance, but accountability. And if we go deeper, what's happening here is also a reclamation of narrative. For centuries, India was spoken about in global politics. Now it is doing the speaking. By challenging Trump's tone and insinuations, India reclaimed its voice and did so not through aggression, but through reason. That, my friends, is real power, the kind of power that doesn't need to raise its voice because its presence is already felt. What makes this moment even more significant is how it is being perceived globally. Nations across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, many of whom have long watched Western powers dominate global discourse, are beginning to see India as a potential model, a country that rose not by colonizing, but by decolonizing, not by invading, but by integrating, not by dictating, but by dialoguing. This isn't just geopolitics, it's global storytelling. And India, it seems, has taken the pen into its own hands. Now, back to Trump. When a former American president's worldview comes into conflict with the rising confidence of a nation like India, the clash isn't just about policy, it's about identity. Trump's worldview is transactional, centered on who gains, who wins, who loses. India, on the other hand, is projecting a vision based on partnership, culture, and coexistence. This is not merely ideological, it's generational, it's civilizational. You see, we are witnessing the emergence of a truly multipolar world. And in such a world, power is no longer measured solely by GDP or military might. It's measured by voice, by values, by vision. And India's vision is resonating, not because it's perfect, but because it offers an alternative to the chaos of populist noise. It offers steadiness in a time of disruption. And that's why Trump's words felt so out of place. They belong to an old world where leaders could speak without consequence and be applauded for provocation. But India isn't clapping. And neither are millions around the world who see the value in something quieter but stronger: responsibility. So what's the lesson here for the rest of us? That leadership is not about how many people you can rally to your corner. It's about how many people you can uplift with your example. India, by calling out Trump, didn't just defend itself. It raised a mirror to all of us, to every country, every citizen, every leader, asking, are we choosing ego or ethics? Are we building a future grounded in shared respect or stuck in the shadows of old power games? In this defining moment, India reminded us that you don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to speak your truth with clarity and courage. And the world, when ready, will listen.
When we speak of influence, we often imagine grandeur, leaders on podiums, armies in formation, flags raised high. But true influence, the kind that shapes hearts and steers nations, is subtler. It requires integrity, consistency, and trust. That's what Donald Trump seems to have lost, not just in the eyes of many Americans, but increasingly across the international stage. The incident with India was not isolated. It was the symptom of a much larger ailment, a deepening global isolation.
Let's be honest here. Trump's approach to leadership was always performative. From the very beginning of his political journey, he mastered the art of spectacle, tweet storms at midnight, rally chants, and an us versus them narrative that thrilled a base but bewildered the world. That style might work in local politics for a moment, but global politics is a different arena. It demands cooperation, nuance, and a long memory, and the world remembers. When India stood up to Trump's remarks, it didn't just expose a crack in a diplomatic relationship, it reflected a growing trend. Traditional allies are cautious, emerging powers are distancing, and global institutions, once deferential to American dominance, are no longer holding their breath for US approval. This is the quiet crisis of American soft power under Trump's influence. It became loud but less persuasive. Look around, Europe has grown skeptical. Canada, despite its cultural kinship with the US, has kept Trumpism at bay. Africa remembers being dismissed in crude terms. Even Latin America, often pushed into America's geopolitical orbit, is leaning into regional cooperation rather than US dependency. And then there's Asia, where countries like Japan, Vietnam, South Korea, and of course, India are realizing that their futures may be safer in plural partnerships than in lopsided friendships with Washington. None of this means America has stopped being powerful. The power without trust is like a crown without a kingdom. Trump's global conduct, his impulsive alliances, his friendly nods to autocrats, his erratic withdrawal from global pacts eroded the very foundations of American reliability. The Paris Climate Agreement, the Iran nuclear deal, the World Health Organization. Trump didn't just walk away from these, he dragged America's moral authority with him. Now, contrast this with the earlier American legacy. Roosevelt, Kennedy, Obama, leaders who, regardless of political leaning, understood the theater of diplomacy. They knew that the world watches, that tone matters, that gestures become history. Trump, on the other hand, turned every summit into a show and every handshake into a headline. But real diplomacy doesn't work that way. It happens in the quiet rooms, in the back channels, in the careful threading of shared interests. And this is why his isolation today feels so stark. Because when the show is over and the lights go down, influence is not about applause, it's about allegiance. And those allegiances are fraying, not because countries hate America, but because they fear unpredictability. Leadership, after all, is a promise. And Trump's presidency, his words, his withdrawals, his disregard for nuance broke that promise more than once. Let's return to India for a moment. When India refused to entertain Trump's provocations, it didn't just defend its national dignity, it modeled how to say no to political bullying. And many nations noticed, because Trump didn't just alienate those he criticized, he exhausted those he claimed to support. Allies don't want to be used as props. They want to be respected as equals. India understood that. So did Germany, so did New Zealand. And this growing awareness among world leaders is reshaping how global partnerships are formed. And here's the deeper truth. Trump's isolation isn't just political. It's philosophical. His worldview, where might makes right, where deals are zero-sum, where diplomacy is a game of domination, simply does not align with the new global ethic. Today, the challenges we face, climate change, AI governance, economic inequality, pandemics, are too complex for any one nation to resolve alone. They demand cooperation. They demand empathy. They demand a worldview that sees other nations not as pawns, but as partners. But Trump's lens is narrower. He sees strength in dominance, not dialogue. And that's why, even after leaving office, his presence on the world stage is met with growing resistance. Because the world has moved on. It's searching for steadier hands, for moral clarity, for humility. And let me say this with love and clarity. Isolation is not the punishment, it's the consequence. When a leader refuses to listen, to learn, to adapt, the world doesn't attack them. It simply walks away, one step at a time. And soon the applause fades, the doors close, the influence becomes an echo. But here's where hope still lives. America is more than any one leader. Its promise is greater than its past. And even in the shadow of Trump's isolation, there are voices rising, diplomats, thinkers, young leaders who still believe in bridges, not walls, who know that the world needs America not just for its power, but for its principles. The question, though, is whether the America of tomorrow will heed that call or repeat the same spectacle that led to this moment of estrangement. As for Trump, his reckoning isn't just at home. It's in the silent rooms of global diplomacy where his absence speaks louder than his presence ever did. There is a fundamental tension in global leadership today, one that defines not just how leaders govern, but how they are perceived by the world. That tension is between populism and statesmanship. Donald Trump, in many ways, is the embodiment of the former. His rise was fueled by a populist fire, raw, emotional, divisive, yet undeniably captivating for many. But populism, though electrifying in the short term, is often a poor fit for international diplomacy where nuance, patience, and foresight are the currencies of success. Trump's style, his bluntness, his rejection of political correctness, his preference for spectacle made him a phenomenon in American politics. But what plays well in rallies does not translate easily into treaty rooms. When Trump enters global discussions with the same energy he brings to a campaign rally, it sends a message not of strength, but of instability. International leaders, by and large, are not swayed by slogans or spin. They are looking for predictability. They want to know that a handshake today won't turn into a tweet storm tomorrow. And that's where the friction begins. Because Trump's populism thrives on disruption. It sees diplomacy as a transaction, alliances as leverage, and friends as temporary. But global leadership, real leadership, asks for something deeper. It asks for the ability to sit across a table from someone you disagree with and still find a path forward. That's not populism, that's statesmanship. And it's something the world is longing for now more than ever. Let's look at how this plays out in real terms. During Trump's presidency, allies were often stunned by his erratic behavior. One day praising a leader, the next threatening sanctions, pulling out of decades-old agreements, then demanding loyalty. Such inconsistency may energize a voter base at home, but it deeply unnerves international actors who rely on continuity and trust. Because here's the truth, the global system doesn't move on applause, it moves on trust. And this brings us to the broader consequences. Trump's populism doesn't just isolate him, it destabilizes the spaces he enters. Countries begin to hedge their bets. They look to new alliances, they invest in regional structures, they distance themselves from an America they no longer recognize. And perhaps most importantly, they begin to question whether democracy itself is compatible with global leadership if it allows for such unpredictability. This has profound ripple effects. Think of a young leader in Africa or Southeast Asia watching Trump mock international norms and still gain domestic support. What message does that send? That diplomacy is weakness, that collaboration is betrayal, that division is power. These are not the lessons we want echoed across the corridors of power around the world. India's recent rebuke of Trump is, in this context, not just a defense of its national pride, it's a defense of the idea that global politics must be grounded in respect, not rhetoric. It is a message to the world that being loud does not make one correct, and being bold does not make one wise. It's a subtle reminder that power must be exercised with responsibility, not rage. General Asim Munir's silence, too, fits this theme. It shows a recognition that Trump's version of politics, where loyalty is fleeting and dialogue as performance, is not a reliable foundation for any serious engagement. Munir, a man trained in the precision of military strategy, likely saw what many diplomats see, a man who governs with impulse, not intention. Populism, by its very nature, thrives on enemies. It needs someone to blame, someone to attack, someone to defeat. But the world today is too interconnected for this us versus them mentality. Climate change doesn't care about borders. Pandemics don't pause for patriotism. Artificial intelligence, resource conflicts, digital warfare, these are problems that require unity, not division. Yet Trump's style glorifies confrontation. His public interactions with leaders are often transactional, sometimes even theatrical. He praises dictators while undermining democratic allies. He negotiates not with empathy, but with bravado. And this isn't just a matter of style, it's a dangerous precedent. Because if world leaders begin to imitate this model, we risk turning diplomacy into performance art and peace into a game of chicken. I often reflect on what the world truly needs in this moment. And I keep coming back to the same word, stewardship. A steward is someone who understands they are merely the caretaker of something greater than themselves. A steward listens, adapts, and puts the collective good above personal legacy. That is what statesmanship requires. And it is what populism, particularly Trump's brand, so often denies. This is not to say that populist energy should be ignored. It comes from real pain, real disillusionment, and a real hunger for authenticity. But authenticity without accountability is not leadership, it's self-indulgence, and that is where Trump's international persona falters. He speaks for himself, not for a shared vision of the world. He offers drama, but not direction. In contrast, leaders like Angela Merkel, Jacinda Ardern, and even Modi, despite their own controversies, have learned to balance populist energy with the responsibilities of statehood. They understand the gravity of their words, the permanence of their decisions, and that's what makes them enduring players on the world stage. So when we ask, why did India call out Trump? Why did Munir stay silent? The answer may be simpler than we think. The world is tired. Tired of unpredictability, tired of aggression, tired of leaders who mistake noise for wisdom. What it craves is not more disruption, but more depth. Trump's populism may continue to find echo chambers at home, but in the concert halls of global diplomacy, the music is changing. The tempo is slower, more deliberate. And those who can't keep up with the rhythm will find themselves not leading the world, but watching from the wings. Moments like these don't just shape headlines, they shape history. When a former US president is publicly rebuked by one of the world's largest democracies and quietly dismissed by a powerful military leader from a rival nation, we're not just witnessing political maneuvering, we are witnessing a shift in what leadership means in the 21st. And this is more than a Trump story, it's a morality tale. It's a mirror to every leader, every citizen, and every institution that claims to care about justice, dignity, and peace. Let's take a step back. Donald Trump, for all his controversies, is not an anomaly. He is a reflection. He reflects a world that has long rewarded charisma over character, noise over nuance, and force over fairness. But now the tides are turning. The world is growing weary of performance politics and waking up to the cost of chaos. And the clearest evidence of this awakening lies in how countries are beginning to respond, not with anger, but with quiet principle.
India's refusal to tolerate disrespect is not just a defense of its leader, it is a defense of its self-worth. For decades, nations like India were often expected to stay in their lane, to accept Western patronage, to be grateful for recognition. But this is a new India, confident, strategic, conscious of its cultural and political power. When Trump crossed a line, when his words veered into insult rather than inquiry, India responded with an evolved sense of self. No shouting, no pandering, just a firm, clear signal. We demand respect.
That is a lesson for every emerging power today. That sovereignty is not just about land or borders, it's about narrative. It's about reclaiming the right to define your own story on the world stage. India's stance is a declaration that post-colonial nations are no longer waiting for validation. They are asserting their place in a new moral order. Now turn to General Asim Munir, the man who said nothing. That silence was not a void. It was a message. It said, we will not be pulled into noise for the sake of drama. Pakistan, with its complex relationship with both the United States and India, could have easily exploited Trump's remarks for short-term political gain. It didn't. Instead, Munir chose discretion, perhaps even restraint. That restraint in a region too often fueled by provocation is a mark of leadership. And so we arrive at the heart of the matter. The world is no longer interested in strong men. It's interested in wise men and women. We are in an era of interconnected crises, climate disasters, cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, social fragmentation, and economic inequality. These cannot be solved by bravado. They require courage, but a different kind. The courage to listen, the courage to compromise, the courage to serve. What this triangle, Trump, India, Munir, teaches us is that leadership is not defined by dominance. It is defined by depth. Trump, for all his success in galvanizing a movement, consistently fell short of global leadership because he refused to understand that the world is not a campaign, it is a covenant. A covenant between nations, between peoples, between generations.
That covenant has been weakened over the years. Institutions once held sacred have been politicized. Truth has been bent, justice delayed. But in this precise moment, we see a flicker of hope. Because when India speaks truth to power, and when Munir chooses silence over spectacle, the world begins to recalibrate. It begins to remember that power is a privilege, and that privilege must be earned every single day.
But the burden isn't just on leaders, it's on us. What kind of leadership are we endorsing with our attention, our votes, our loyalty? Are we drawn to the loudest voice or the clearest vision? Do we want leaders who stir our anger or those who feed our conscience? These questions matter now more than ever because the consequences of poor leadership are no longer local, they are global. A careless tweet can move markets. A reckless policy can ignite war. A lie, repeated enough times, can redefine reality. So what do? We demand more from our politicians, from our generals, from our media, and from ourselves. We must elevate leaders who elevate us, not just emotionally, but ethically. We must choose those who bring people together, even when it's hard, even when it's unpopular. Leadership at its best is sacred. It's a form of stewardship. And what the world needs now is a new breed of stewards, those who understand the weight of their words, who honor the dignity of their opponents, who act not just for the next election, but for the next generation. That's why this story matters. Not because it's another Trump controversy, but because it reveals a global yearning for maturity, for morality, for meaning. And that yearning is not confined to Washington or Delhi or Rawalpindi, it's everywhere. It's in the hearts of people who are tired of being lied to, tired of being used, tired of being afraid. We want leaders who lead from the soul, who understand that diplomacy is not a game of chess, but a dialogue of values, who know that strength is not measured by how many people you can control, but by how many you can empower. So let this moment be a wake-up call. Let it be the turning point where we move away from vanity and toward vision, where we stop rewarding performance and start demanding purpose, where we remember that the true test of leadership is not what you say when the cameras are rolling, but what you choose when no one is watching. And in that quiet space between India's stand, Munir's silence, and Trump's unraveling, we find the real story. A world in search of grown-ups, of guardians, of guides.